The sky above the dead moon was a strip of cold fire, a scar of stars too distant to matter. Jace Maddox pulled himself out of the wreck in breaths that tasted like metal and frost. His ship had opened the ground like a wound ribs of hull, jutting from the regolith, cables trailing like torn veins. Every step jarred something loose in his side and flashed warnings across his visor. Oxygen, critical. He counted them like they were beads in a prayer he didn't believe in, willing the red to turn amber, the amber to turn green. It never did. He took stock because that's what a pilot did when everything else failed. Right leg, responsive, protesting. Left shoulder, burned where a strut had kissed through the suit plating. Comes static and the low animal hum of radiation. Beacon, manual, only. He took out the flare narrow tube no longer than his hand and rolled it across his knuckles, as if it might sing a tune instead of burn. When he closed his eyes, he saw what he always saw after the crash, the moment before the blot of light. The moment when the squadron's wing geometry was perfect. He saw Miko's fighter drift a hair too slow, the anomaly dragging them inward like a whirlpool of physics and hate. He saw the order in his log that wasn't his voice. The counterfeit command that had peeled them off from safety and fed them to the mouth of something ancient. Betrayal had a color. Out here, it was the gray of dust, swallowing the names he didn't say aloud. He popped the seal on the flare. It licked to life with a white-blue tongue that wrote a trembling column into the dark. For a second, he felt the childish rise of hope. Then movement snagged the edge of his vision. A shiver along the horizon line. A low glide like a manta through water. He killed the flare and crouched behind a slanted wing panel, lungs scraping. The bottom of his tank. His HUD painted the moving smear with an algorithm that tried to be brave and named it Unknown Likely Drone. The ground vibrated with a sound he felt more than heard, subsonic, patient. Jace slid the sidearm from his thigh holster and kept the muzzle on the shadow. The moon had been dead for a century, they said, but he could tell some parts of it were only sleeping. He tried to time his breaths to the suit's recycling hiss, so he wouldn't cough the last of his oxygen into the void for nothing. He waited. The movement broke itself into smaller movements, and then into a shape that did not fit any heat map profile of machine. Tall, bipedal, draped in something that moved like cloth, despite the cold. A figure walked out of the haze with the poise of someone who never feared falling. She was framed against the ridge like a cut from a brighter world, slender and long-limbed under a battered cloak whose edges had been stitched and restitched by a hand that refused to surrender. The weapon came first, angled with lazy precision. At the center of his visor, a green light along its spine pulsed with her pulse. Her voice slid through his helmet on a hijacked channel. A clean frequency that felt like a blade dipped in water. Drop the flare, or die here. Jace didn't move. The sidearm felt small and rude in his hand. He let it rest on the wing panel and raised his other palm, showing her the empty. She didn't repeat herself. She hadn't sounded angry the first time, only practical. Like she had weighed his life and found that it balanced a scale he hadn't known he was on. "The flare's out," he said, and his voice sounded like a stranger wearing his throat. "You lit it," she replied, as if that were both accusation and proof of something. "Everything on this rock sees light." The cloak shifted, and he caught a glimpse of her beneath its armor that wasn't made for war so much as for travel. Plates that curved without seams, a band along her wrist, etched with characters that the translator refused to betray. Her face. When she pushed back, the hood had the geometry of royalty and exile. High bones. Mouth like a question never asked. Eyes not a color any human had yet named. She watched him with a stillness that would have unnerved him, even if he'd had air to waste. "Identify," she said. "Jace Maddox, pilot." The word tasted wrong, like he was lying to her, or to himself. "You?" A beat, a long one. Her? Gaze skimmed his suit, found the hairline crack near his clavicle port, the frosting along the edges that said he was bleeding atmosphere in a sigh too small to hear. She shifted the weapon by a degree, not away from him, but off. Serenya, she said at last. Serenya Valis. The name didn't fit any intel packet he'd ever been briefed on. He tried to file it anyway, and found his mental cabinets were all jammed by pain and distance. He looked at the mouth of the crater, at the black shapes lying still there, insectile limbs curled to their own chests. Not all of the drones were asleep. Some were just waiting for a reason to wake. I wasn't signaling you, he said. No, she answered. You lit a torch for the dead. They love torches. Something in him bristled, an old reflex that demanded the dignity of explanation. I crashed. I noticed, she said, again without cruelty. The weapon dipped. Another centimeter. Your oxygen is failing. You can ration bravado or breath, not both. If he'd had more air, he would have laughed. The survival calculus was familiar options displayed like cards in a hand that never added up to a win. He stood, and the world detonated at the edges of his sight, a ring of black fireworks. He took it slow, kept the panel between her weapon and his center line, and nodded at the horizon. If drones are coming, standing in the open seems like a poor plan. Then don't stand. She half turned, cloak snapping in a current he couldn't feel. Beneath the hem, he saw the hint of boots that had walked this dust long enough to understand it. Follow. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a lifeline tossed in the voice of someone who didn't have many left. He hesitated because his training told him to distrust sudden allies, and because his history gnawed at him with the teeth of false orders. A flashback ripped through him without mercy. Miko's laugh on the private channel, the way it cut off mid-word, the spatter of static where a friend's name should have been, the cold command that had walked them into the dark. He swallowed what rose, tasted blood, and tin. The pain in his ribs answered with a hard, clean flare that anchored him back in the now. She watched all of that register, and did not pretend not to. If you plan to shoot me, she said, do it before you pass out. He lifted his hand, in something like surrender, and something like truce. Lead the way. They skirted the wreck, and he felt the eyes of sleeping machines follow the heat of their bodies, like wolves under ice. As they moved, he measured her the way he measured threats, then forgot to finish measuring. She moved like a place to rest. It angered him that he wanted to close the distance between them for a reason that wasn't tactical. It frightened him that the comfort had nothing to do with rescue, and everything to do with the simple fact of not being alone. She guided him toward a fold in the terrain. He would have missed a scar in the regolith, where shadows pooled. A narrow seam opened as they approached, the stone answering a frequency, her band whispered. Air kissed his cheeks inside the helmet, a teasing temperature change he would have wept over if he'd had the moisture to spare. Why are you here? He asked, because the question bit until he let it out. Serenya paused on the threshold, weapon slung but ready, watching him over her shoulder. In that sliver of time, with dust falling in curtains from the seam, and the moon's wind moving the fringe of her cloak, she looked like a statue of someone's patron saint of lost causes. Her eyes were complicated. For a heartbeat he thought he saw grief there, and for another, iron. Because I chose to be, she said. Because sometimes exile is safer than home. She gestured into the dark, where a low light pulsed like the beat of a sleeping heart. Walk. We talk after you breathe. He went, because living had always been his first argument in any debate. The seam closed behind them with a sigh that could have belonged to the moon or to him. Inside, a chamber opened like a lung, the air thin but precious, the walls inscribed with a language that curled like vines around the memory of war. Serenya moved ahead, sure-footed as if the place were a map drawn under her skin. He wondered how long she had been buying breaths here. With the currency of hours no one else would ever count. He wondered who had taught her to aim a weapon like it was an extension of a decision, and why whatever world had done that to her had also left her alone on a rock that ate names. Behind them, beyond stone and seam, the surface woke with the soft click of gears, remembering their purpose. Drones turned their faces toward the place where a flare had briefly kissed the dark. Inside, Jace counted his breaths and found that, for the first time since the crash, they did not belong to panic. They belonged to the room, and to the woman who had carved a life out of nothing and asked him nothing in return but obedience. For now, he looked at her profile, the way the low light drew silver across the edge of her jaw. He thought of the names he carried, and how strange it was that in a tomb of old machines, he wanted to learn one name more completely than any in his log. Serenya Valis. He said it in his head until it sounded less like a stranger's secret and more like a direction. "Why? Are you alone?" he asked softly, the words escaping before he could school them. She did not turn. The pause was a whole conversation. "Because that is the only way to survive some families," she said, and the quiet was an ache. "And because you lit a flare, pilot, now everything that hunts light hunts us." A distant thrum rose like thunder, finding its path through stone. She took one step deeper, and he followed, broken and breathing, into whatever came next. The seam of rock sealed behind them with a sound like a sigh, and for a moment, Jace thought it was his own lungs giving up. The sudden darkness swallowed them whole, and then thin veins of blue lit along the walls, pulsing like blood through an ancient body. Serenya walked ahead without hesitation, her long cloak brushing the ground, her boots making no sound. She didn't look back, but her voice carried down the narrow corridor, calm and precise. "Keep close. The ground listens here." Jace's visor flickered in protest. His oxygen readout was still bleeding red, each breath a debt he couldn't repay. His shoulder burned, and every movement dragged a shadow of pain along his ribs. He didn't ask where they were going. His instincts told him she wouldn't answer yet. He just followed, because anything was better than the frozen silence above, where metal carcasses watched and drones waited for movement. The corridor opened suddenly into a chamber, wide and high enough to swallow the remains of his ship. Pale lights bloomed in sequence, revealing a world carved beneath the surface, walls covered in alien glyphs. Thin streams of water running through grooves, metal columns wrapped in vines of luminous crystal. It was a place built long before either of them, abandoned and waiting. Jace couldn't help but stare. "You live here?" he asked, his voice rough, half disbelief, half awe. "Sometimes," she said. She was already moving to a console half buried in stone, her fingers dancing over symbols his translator couldn't decode. "When the surface grows unfriendly." "Unfriendly," he repeated. "You mean the drones?" Her lips curved just slightly, not quite a smile. "I mean everything." The console hummed, and a faint rush of air filled the chamber, thin but breathable. Jace removed his helmet slowly, as if afraid the air would vanish if he moved too fast. The first breath hit like a gift dry, metallic, but sweet because it was free. He leaned against the wall, dragging in another and another, for a few seconds. The ache in his chest loosened. Serenya watched him, arms folded, the weapon now slung across her back. Her eyes, pale and sharp, studied him like a question. "You're injured." "Nothing new," he said, trying to stand straighter. "Crashed harder than planned. You shouldn't be alive." "I get that a lot." She didn't argue. Instead, she crossed the chamber with a fluid grace that made her cloak sway like liquid shadow. She knelt by his side, and without asking, opened a compartment on his suit. His instinct was to resist, but there was something in her movements clean, exact, no wasted gesture, that told him she wasn't curious, just efficient. Her fingers found the hairline crack near his collar, her face close enough that he could see the faint silver thread of a scar along her jawline. "This won't hold," she said. "Your suit's bleeding air. I'll seal it." "Why help me?" She paused, met his eyes. "Because you lit a flare. Because you're loud, and loud things attract death. If you die, they'll come looking for what killed you. So it's self-preservation." "Mostly," she said. And there was Something under that word, something he couldn't name. She worked quickly, patching the crack with a strip of flexible metal pulled from her belt. Her touch was cool, her face impassive. But Jace felt the strange comfort of another presence in a world that had promised nothing but emptiness. When she finished, she rose in one smooth motion and stepped back. "You walk, you breathe, you follow my lead," she said. "Anything else gets you killed. And you? I've been dying slower here than anywhere else. That's all you need to know." The tension in her voice was quiet, but unmissable. He wanted to ask more who she was running from, why she was hiding, but something about the set of her shoulders told him the questions could wait. They moved again, deeper into the tunnels. At every turn, Jace noted the way Serenya moved, like she belonged to this place, the way the walls seemed to recognize her. He noticed, too, the things she didn't say, how her gaze lingered on old scars in the stone, how her hands sometimes brushed the carvings like a memory. A sound broke the rhythm, a distant click, metallic, faint, but clear. Serenya stopped mid-step, one hand raised, the other already on her weapon. The air seemed too thin again. "They're awake," she whispered. Jace drew his sidearm, pulse quickening. "The drones?" She tilted her head, listening. Something smaller. A scout. The sound grew, a slow, deliberate scrape, like claws on steel. Serenya turned to him, and for the first time, Jace saw a flicker of something in her eyes, not fear, exactly, but calculation sharpened to a knife. "Stay behind me. If it sees you, it will call the others. What about you?" "It already knows me," she said simply. They pressed to the wall, the chamber dimming as if the light itself was hiding. The sound drew closer, deliberate and patient. Jace tightened his grip on the sidearm, but in that suspended moment, another thought burned brighter. This woman, alone in exile, navigating a dead moon with a calm born of scars, had just claimed his life as part of hers, and for reasons he couldn't explain, he trusted her more than the sky that had brought him here. Asterisk, the sound came again. Closer this time, a metallic scrape softened by distance, but sharp enough to cut through the stale air. Jace steadied his breathing, sidearm raised, though he knew the weight of it wouldn't matter against machines built for war. Serenya moved first. She didn't flinch, didn't turn her head, only lifted her hand and touched the wall. The pulse along the stone dimmed, sliding the chamber into shadow as if the place itself obeyed her. "They'll look for heat," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't give them any." Jace nodded, his visor set to low power, heart beating like a drum in his ears. The tension was a new kind of gravity, pulling him tight into the moment. He watched her stand straight, balanced, a hunter ready to strike. Even here, with shadows closing in, she looked like she belonged. A queen disguised as a ghost. The scout revealed itself as a glint of silver on the edge of the light. Small, insect-like, its body hummed with energy, a dozen sharp limbs, moving silently as it crawled along the ceiling. It paused, its lens turning toward them like an unblinking eye. Jace's finger tightened on the trigger, but Serenya's hand lifted once more, a single gesture that told him to wait. The scout drifted closer, wings whispering faintly, the soft buzz echoing in the chamber. Serenya's calm didn't falter. She let it come within a few meters, then pressed her palm to the band on her wrist. A pulse rippled from her body, silent but visible in the subtle glow of the walls. The scout froze mid-flight, its limbs jerking like a puppet on a cut string. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then it fell, lifeless, clattering to the ground at her feet. Jace lowered his weapon slowly, staring at the broken machine. "You could have mentioned you can do that." Her cloak shifted as she crouched to pick up the drone, examining it with quick, precise movements. It was old, easier to kill. Others won't be. She pocketed a small piece of its core and tossed the rest aside. They'll send more now. Jace's thoughts snapped to the flare, to the signal he'd burned into the night. Because of me, because of light, she corrected. And because this moon remembers everything. That touches it. Come. They moved deeper into the tunnels, passing walls carved with symbols that twisted like vines. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of water dripping somewhere far away. Chase's mind churned with questions, but the rhythm of her stride kept him quiet. She knew these paths. She belonged to them. He was a shadow following something brighter than he could understand. Finally, the narrow corridor widened again, opening into a space that looked almost like a hall. Thin columns rose from the floor, each one etched with spirals of glowing script. In the center was a pool of clear water, still as glass. Reflecting the blue veins of light overhead, Serenya knelt by the water, cupping it in her hands before drinking. The gesture was almost human, but there was something graceful, ceremonial, about it. She glanced at him and nodded. It's clean. Jace crouched, filling his palms and drinking greedily. The water was cold and sharp, a relief he hadn't known he needed. When he looked up, Serenya was watching him. You're quieter now, she said, trying to keep up, not just with my pace. Her gaze flicked to his hand on the weapon, to the exhaustion in his face. You carry something heavy, not just your body. Jace swallowed hard, the taste of the water turning metallic in his mouth. He hadn't expected kindness or curiosity. I made a mistake, he admitted after a pause. People died, I lived. Survivor's guilt, she said softly, as though it was a language she spoke often. It eats slower than hunger, but it eats more. Her words were sharp but not cruel, and for the first time since the crash, Jace felt seen. He studied her face, searching for the edges of her mystery. What about you? Why is a princess hiding in a cave on a moon no one cares about? She didn't look away, but the shadow of something crossed her eyes. Because home is not always safe. Because sometimes the walls you build become your prison. It wasn't a full answer, but it was enough to quiet the question for now. They sat in silence. The hum of unseen machines vibrating faintly through the floor. Then a sound shattered the stillness, a heavy, grinding echo from somewhere above. The air trembled, and dust rained down from the ceiling. Serenya stood in a single, fluid motion, weapon in hand. They're coming faster than I thought, she said. We can't stay here. How many? Enough to make dying quick if we stay. Come. As they moved, the ground beneath them shook, a low roar, building like thunder trapped in stone. The moon itself seemed to wake, and Jace knew whatever hunted them wasn't going to wait much longer. He glanced at her as they ran, the light catching the edge of her profile. There was no fear there, only focus, and something else, something almost fierce, like a promise. Jace didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew this. He trusted her steps more than the path. And for now, that would have to be enough. The tunnels shuddered again, loose stones clattering from the ceiling, as if the dead moon were warning them to keep moving. Jace stayed close to Serenya, his breath ragged, his sidearm shaking just enough to betray the strain in his body. She, by contrast, moved like a line of steel drawn through darkness and hurried, deliberate, every turn and step measured. The lights along her wristband cast faint arcs of color on the walls, symbols waking and fading with each movement. They reached a junction where three paths split, like the veins of a leaf. Serenya paused, kneeling briefly to touch the ground. The stone under her palm seemed to answer with a soft pulse. The patrols are widening, she said. We have minutes before this section is overrun. Jace swallowed hard, tasting dust. What's the plan? Hide? Fight? We can't fight here, she said, rising to her full height. The tunnels are too narrow. We move to the old heart. There's room to think therein, room to bleed if we must. She started down the middle path, and he followed, the rhythm of his boots quickening against the stone. The air grew colder. As they descended, a thin fog clinging to the walls, faintly luminous where the veins of crystal ran. Jace's visor kept flickering, his oxygen levels still dangerously low. The patch she'd applied had slowed the leak, but every breath still counted. They reached a landing that opened into another chamber, larger than the ones before. The ceilings soared high, vanishing into shadow, and the walls were carved with sweeping arcs of alien script, curling and intertwining like a language that might also be a prayer. At the center stood a tall spire of metal and stone fused together, humming faintly, surrounded by scattered fragments of machines, long dead. This is where they were born? Serenya murmured, her gaze lingering on the spire. The drones, the war they belonged to, started here, and ended here. Jace stepped closer, drawn by the quiet power of the place. What kind of war? An old one, she said, touching a fragment at her feet, brushing away the dust as though it deserved respect. One my people began, and then abandoned. This moon was supposed to be buried, forgotten, but nothing stays forgotten forever. There was a weight in her voice now, a kind of grief disguised as fact. Jace wanted to ask more, but she moved on, inspecting the spire's base, her cloak trailing across the stone. A sudden sound cut the moment short, a sharp metallic click, followed by a steady whine rising in pitch. Jace swung his weapon toward the noise, his chest tightening. "Don't fire," Serenya said, lifting her hand. "It's not awake yet." A shape crawled into the edge of the light, larger than the scout they'd seen before. Its body was a blend of polished armor and exposed gears, 4 legs gripping the stone, a head bristling with sensors. It stopped, scanning, its lens glowing an ominous blue. "They're not supposed to be active here," Serenya whispered, her voice low. "Maybe they didn't get that memo," Jace replied. Shifting his weight, the machine's lens flicked toward them. Serenya moved fast, faster than Jace could track. She pressed her wristband against the spire, sending a cascade of symbols rushing up its surface. The machine froze for an instant, then spasmed violently, collapsing with a screech of metal. The sound echoed through the chamber, rolling down every corridor like a drumbeat. "They'll know now," she said. "We've bought seconds, not safety." Jay scanned the shadows above, the tension in his muscles singing with pain. "If they're coming, we should go." Serenya turned to him then, and for the first time since their meeting, something in her expression softened. The set of her jaw loosened, the sharpness in her eyes easing just enough to let something else through, something almost human. "You saved me back there," she said. "When the scout came, you didn't run, you stayed ready." Jace blinked, surprised by the sudden honesty. "I didn't have anywhere to run. Still," she said, "I noticed." The words hung there, quiet but heavier than the hum of the spire. She turned away before he could answer, checking the perimeter, but not before he caught the faintest curve of her lips. They moved again, pushing deeper into the moon's underbelly. The passage narrowed until they were shoulder to shoulder. The stone, cool and damp, the only sound there, uneven breathing. When they reached a small alcove, Serenya stopped and motioned for him to sit. "You're slowing," she said, not unkindly. "You won't last another fight like this." "I've had worse," he muttered, but his body betrayed him, aching with every breath. Without a word, she knelt, pulled a slim injector from her belt, and pressed it gently to his arm. The cool surge of medicine slipped through his veins, lightening his head. "Not a cure," she said, "but it will keep you upright." Jace studied her face while she worked, the faint light catching the lines of focus there. She was distant and careful, but beneath it, he sensed a weight, a loneliness carved as deep as the tunnels around them. "Why help me, really?" he asked. Serenya met his eyes, and for a moment, there was no caution there, only truth. Because exile is quieter when there's someone else to hear the silence. The words were simple, but they stayed with him as the ground trembled again, and a new sound rose, a chorus of mechanical legs, hundreds of them, moving closer. Serenya stood, weapon drawn, cloak sweeping behind her. "Stay close, pilot. The easy part is over." The air trembled like a living thing, each vibration carrying the promise of danger. Jace could feel the rhythm of the machines somewhere beyond the walls, their steps heavy, deliberate, drawing closer. Serenya moved quickly, but with the same controlled grace, her cloak trailing as she led him down a sloping corridor. The glow from her wristband danced across the stone, painting their path with thin streaks of blue. They passed narrow passages lined with alien symbols, some half buried, some still alive with light. Jace found his thoughts wandering even as his pulse raced. There was something haunting about the way she touched the walls, her fingers brushing the carvings as if each one held a memory. It struck him that this place was not just a hiding ground, was hers, in some way he didn't yet understand. Those things, he said, keeping his voice low. They're more than patrols, aren't they? They were guardians once, Serenya replied without slowing, built to defend. Now they only remember the hunt, and you know how to stop them. She glanced over her shoulder, a wry flicker in her eyes. For a time, but they learn. The corridor opened into a wider chamber, where the ground sloped toward a pit. In the center, a dormant machine lay half buried, its limbs twisted like a frozen insect. Around it, scattered crates and debris told the story of others who had come here and failed. Serenya crouched, rummaging through the remains with a practiced hand. "Help me," she said. Jace joined her, kneeling despite the ache in his ribs. They found ration packs, cables, and a broken but still glowing power cell. Serenya examined it, her face thoughtful. "Enough charge for one burst. We'll need it." "For what?" "You'll see." She took the cable, stripped it with a small blade, and started assembling something small but sharp-edged. Jace watched her work, mesmerized by the precision of her hands. Every move was purposeful, every decision fast and unhesitant. She was a soldier, a wanderer, and something more, a woman carrying secrets that made her both formidable and unbearably human. When she finally spoke, her voice softened, as though the weight of the moment had shifted. "You never answered me before. Who betrayed you?" Jace stiffened. The memory cut like glass, but her tone wasn't sharp. It was curious, even kind. "An order came through, not from my command. Someone altered it, sent us straight into a trap. I lost people, good ones, and I survived when I shouldn't have." She nodded, her expression unreadable, but not unkind. Survival is its own wound. They worked in silence for a while, until Jace's curiosity pushed past his restraint. "And you? Why, exile? What could a princess do to be banished?" Hands paused for a fraction of a second. When she spoke, her words were measured, quiet, but strong. "They wanted me to be something I refused to be. A weapon. A pawn in a marriage that would have chained my people. I said no." Jace studied her face, lit by the blue veins in the walls. There was defiance there, yes, but also something lonely, something raw. "So you chose this. I chose freedom." The price was everything else. Their eyes held for a moment longer than either expected. The machines were still coming, but the world narrowed to that small exchange. Two exiles, each carrying a different kind of scar, recognizing the shape of pain in the other. The sound of metal striking stone broke it. A sharp echo rolled through the chamber, followed by a distant mechanical screech. Serenya snapped the power cell into the device she'd built and rose. "They're close," she said. "Stay behind me." Jace stood, weapon ready. "You really think that thing will stop them?" She almost smiled. "No, but it might teach them fear." They moved quickly, following another tunnel that twisted upward. The air grew colder, and the hum of the machines grew louder, crawling over the stone like a storm. At one point, they had to squeeze through a narrow fissure, shoulders brushing, breath mingling in the confined space. For a brief moment, there was no war, no machines, just the closeness of another heartbeat. Jace could feel her warmth through the suit, the subtle scent of something metallic and clean. She didn't look at him, but he thought he saw the faintest curve at the corner of her mouth. They emerged into a high-ceilinged vault, its walls glittering with crystal veins. Serenya set the device at the far end and gestured for him to stay low. "Once they come in," she said, "it will hit them. Then we run. We're up. Always up." The sound of claws against stone became thunder. Lights flared in the distance, blue and white, cutting across the vault like the gaze of something alive. Serenya knelt, weapon drawn, her figure outlined against the glow. She was calm, almost serene, and in that calm, Jace found something he hadn't expected: trust. Whatever came through those tunnels, they would face it together. The vault trembled, as if the moon itself had a heartbeat. The sound of metal echoed, closer claws, striking stone, a chorus of machines moving with purpose. Jace crouched low, his sidearm raised, pulse thundering in his ears. He could see the outline of Serenya against the glittering wall, her cloak falling like a shadow behind her. She didn't flinch. Her hands were steady as she adjusted the device they had built, every motion calm and precise, like a musician tuning an instrument before a final performance. "Stay behind the spire," she said, without looking back. "When it hits, they'll hesitate. We run on hesitation." "What if they don't hesitate?" Jace asked. His voice came out thinner than he intended. "Then we improvise," she said, and there was the faintest curve to her words, almost like humor buried deep under the steel. The first drone appeared, sliding into the vault like a spider, its lens sweeping arcs of cold light. It clicked and whirred, its head turning as if scenting the air. Behind it came another, then two more. They were different from the smaller scouts: larger, heavier, their limbs sharper, their movement unnervingly smooth. The air seemed to tighten as the sound of their servos filled the chamber. Serenya waited until they were halfway across the floor. Then she touched her wristband to the device. A pulse ripped through the vault, silent, invisible, but felt. The walls vibrated, the crystals flaring brighter for an instant before dimming. The drones froze, their limbs locked, their lenses flickering with static, the sound of disrupted circuits whining into silence. "Move," she called, already running. Jace pushed himself up, lungs burning, following her through a side passage. The drones twitched as they passed, some trying to shake off the interference, their blue eyes flickering back to life. They ran through tunnels that twisted like veins, the glow of the crystals lighting their faces in brief flashes. Jace could hear the machines recovering, their calls metallic and sharp, echoing behind them. Serenya never slowed. Her stride was long, powerful, almost effortless. Even when the ground shifted beneath them, even when Jace stumbled, she caught his arm and kept him moving. At last, they burst into another chamber, smaller but taller, with a narrow shaft cutting upward like a throat to the surface. Faint light dripped down from above, pale and cold. Serenya turned to him, breath steady, though her eyes burned with urgency. "They'll follow us here," she said, "but they can't climb as fast. This is our chance." Jace looked up, the shaft stretching endlessly, the smooth stone walls broken only by thin ledges. "We climb, unless you'd rather stay and meet them." She didn't wait for a response. She leaped to the first ledge, her fingers gripping stone, her body rising with grace. Jace followed, gritting his teeth against the pull of pain in his ribs. Each move felt heavier, each breath shorter, but he matched her pace as best he could. Halfway up, a metallic screech ripped through the shaft. A drone surged into view below them, crawling along the walls like a nightmare. Its limbs struck sparks from the stone, and its sensor eye burned bright blue. "Faster," Serenya called, her voice echoing above him. Jace climbed his muscles, screaming, sweat slicking his palms inside the gloves. He risked a glance down and saw the machine gaining, its limbs stabbing into the stone with mechanical precision. Serenya stopped at a narrow ledge just wide enough for 2 feet. She turned, pulling a small cylindrical charge from her belt. "Cover your eyes," she said. Jace pressed himself to the wall. Serenya threw the device. It fell, bounced once, and exploded in a bloom of white light that seared even through his closed lids. The blast shook the shaft, sending shards of stone raining down. When Jace opened his eyes, the drone was gone, its body smoking at the bottom of the tunnel. They climbed again, pushing higher, until finally the shaft widened and split into an opening. They crawled out onto a jagged ridge, the dead moon's surface stretching around them. The sky above was black and endless, stars like pinpricks of cold fire. For a moment, there was silence. The vault below was only a memory. The air was thin, sharp, but it tasted like survival. Jace collapsed against the ridge, pulling his helmet free to drink in the cold. Serenya stood a few steps away, looking out at the horizon. The light from the stars touched her face, softening the edges, catching the silver thread of a scar along her jaw. "You could have left me," Jace said, still catching his breath. She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "I could have, but the moon is too quiet, with only one heartbeat." There was something unspoken between them now, a thread stretched tight by danger and trust. The machines were still below, and the night was still full of threats. But for that moment, they were only two people, two exiles standing together on a ridge, the cold wind moving around them like a secret they shared. Jace looked at her, looked at her, and felt something settle, a calmness he hadn't known in years. Broken as he was, this moon no longer felt empty. The stars were sharp above them, silent witnesses to the chase that had almost ended their lives. Jace leaned back against the ridge, his breath slowing but still ragged, his ribs aching. Serenya stood at the edge, scanning the horizon, her figure outlined against the faint silver light. For a moment neither spoke. It was as if the quiet belonged to them alone, stolen from the chaos that roared below. But the quiet didn't last. A low tremor rolled through the stone, subtle but undeniable. Jace stiffened. "They're still coming. They will keep coming," Serenya said, her voice calm but firm. "The signal is out now. Once awakened, they won't stop until the surface is clean." Jace pushed himself to his feet, biting back a groan. Clean means dead. Clean means everything wiped away. They were programmed to erase mistakes. Are we mistakes? Her eyes flicked to him, a glint of something complicated in them. To some, we always were. She turned away before he could answer, crouching near the ridge. From a pouch at her side, she pulled a small transmitter, its casing scratched and scorched. Jace recognized it for what it was, a beacon. But it wasn't pointed upward. It was set to send a pulse down into the tunnels below. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Ending it," she said, working the controls with quick, sure movements. This place wasn't just a hiding ground. It's a burial site. The heart of the old war is still down there. Power dormant, but alive if someone knows how to wake it. I know. Jace took a step closer, the cold wind slicing across his face. "You're going to destroy it? I'm going to make sure it sleeps forever." She glanced at him. "But it means the machines will come here first. They'll follow the signal. We'll have one shot to keep them away long enough." Jace considered her words, then smiled a tired, crooked thing. "Sounds familiar. Make noise. Hold the line. Die trying." "You're not dying here, pilot," she said. "Not if I can help it." They set up quickly. Serenya positioned the beacon on the ridge, its pulse growing louder, brighter, calling every dormant machine like a siren. Jace checked his sidearm, though he knew it was little more than an insult against what was coming. His heart thudded, steady now, not with fear, but with something clearer. The first shapes appeared in the distant stall, angular silhouettes moving with inhuman speed, a glint of blue eyes catching the starlight. Behind them came more, a wave of silent predators crawling across the rocks. Serenya stood beside him, her weapon leveled, her cloak stirring in the thin wind. When I say fall back, you go. I finish it. Not happening, Jace said. You saved me more than once. You don't get to play martyr alone. She gave him a look half irritation, half something softer, and didn't argue. The machines surged closer. They fired first, a volley of searing blue light cracking the ground. Near the ridge, stone exploded around them, but Serenya's return fire was precise, cutting down the first wave with sharp bursts. Jace joined in, his shots more frantic, but no less determined. The noise rose into a storm. Metal-clanged beams of energy split the night. They moved together, step for step, covering each other without thought. When one drone lunged close, Serenya's blade flashed, severing limbs with clean arcs. Jace blasted another back, the recoil shaking his arm. But they were too many. The ridge trembled under the swarm. The beacon's pulse quickened, and a deep rumble answered from below. Something ancient waking, something vast. Serenya's wristband flared. She turned to him, her face pale in the light, and for the first time there was something like fear there, but not of death. When it collapses, this moon will bury itself. The tunnels, the spire, everything. We won't have another chance to leave. Then we leave together, Jace said. She hesitated, torn between duty and something else. Then, softly, you are stubborn, broken, he corrected, grinning, despite it. But stubborn, yes. They fought their way back from the ridge, step by brutal step, the beacon pulsing behind them. A deep crack split the ground, the sound like thunder underfoot. The machines faltered, confused, their lenses flickering. Serenya triggered the final sequence. The beacon let out a sharp, rising tone, and the moon itself seemed to shiver. Time to go, she shouted. They ran. Stones shifted, the ground breaking apart under their feet. A wall of dust rose as the ridge behind them caved inward, swallowing the machines in a roar of collapsing tunnels. The pulse became a scream and then silence, muffled by tons of rock. When the tremors eased, they were lying on the slope of another ridge. The stars still above, the surface quieter than it had ever been. Jace coughed, his visor cracked, his body aching. Serenya was beside him, her weapon gone, her cloak torn, but alive. They turned to each other and laughed, harsh, short, but real. The kind of laugh that came when nothing else made sense. The dead moon lay broken, its secrets buried again. The machines were gone, the tunnels sealed, and for the first time since his crash, Jace felt like the weight on his chest had lifted. Serenya sat up, brushing dust from her face. The beacon is gone. My exile is not. My father's hunters will know I survived, and now I am not alone, she said simply. Jace stood, offered her his hand. She looked at it for a moment, then took it. Together they climbed to the top of the ridge, two silhouettes against a field of endless stars. There was no ship, no home, no clear future, just two people who had chosen to survive, who had chosen each other. They started walking, side by side, the horizon before them wide and empty. But it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like the beginning of something that neither of them had been brave enough to imagine until now.